Hello, everybody, and welcome to Klaus to the Heart here on YouTube.com. I'm Jason Klaus. We certainly appreciate you tuning in to this brand new episode, and I realize it's been quite a while since we've had a new episode on the YouTube channel, but anybody that follows the brand knows that a lot of the focus has been on the podcast. Now, with that being said, I was waiting for the right topic, the right person, or in this case people, to reintroduce the YouTube channel. And that could not, I have the perfect guest. I have the perfect story for this reintroduction. And full disclosure, this is actually being recorded for both YouTube and the podcast. So we're kind of simulcasting here on this particular episode. I have two very special guests who are joining me here on this week's show, and they have a truly remarkable story. A little bit of a backstory first. Jeff Hackett is with me, and with him is his wife, Jessica, and you guys have a very personal story, and that is what this brand is all about, right? Because Jeff, you and I have known each other for a while now.
Yep.
A little bit of a backstory. You worked for me with the Michigan Wrestling Organization as Colonel Law Dog. And
the Colonel retired a long time ago, so I hear he's still floating around somewhere in case he gets called back into service.
You never say never in the wrestling business, right?
Exactly. Yes.
But aside from all that, in the show you portrayed this very aggressive character. You were the manager of Codename Omega, who in real life is a mutual friend of ours, Will Waters.
Yep.
Just a tremendous guy, and I know you and him were very, very close on a personal level, right? So Jeff, the whole thing with this episode is I came across a post from Will that he had posted on Facebook.
Right.
And at the time, I didn't, because I don't spend a tremendous amount of time these days going through timeline and looking at everybody's business, right? Like I go on there, I'll promote my shows, I'll promote the podcast and all this other stuff. But this one, and I don't even know why it struck me, but it had a link, and we will talk about that here in a minute. But right. I read Will's post, and it was very passionately written, and it got my attention to the point to where I reached out, to you, because you and I, we haven't seen each other or talked to each other in quite a while.
Yeah.
And that's how life happens, right?
Right.
We've got family responsibilities, we have jobs, we have obligations, this, that, or the other thing. But I was very, very, I was moved by what Will had written and what essentially it was, and I'm not going to go word for word, but he was trying to raise awareness for this fundraiser that you and your wife are embarking on. And the more I actually read the story, it triggered so many, thoughts and feelings, because full disclosure, a lot of what you guys are dealing with, my wife and I have dealt with another set of friends of ours. So it really, it got me in the heart, really. And I said, Jeff, I'm sorry I missed the fundraiser that Will was trying to do with his endeavors or what have you. And, I wish I had paid more attention to it. But at the same time, I'm like, let's get you on the show. Let's talk about this, because I know a lot of our fans under the podcast network and the YouTube show, I think this will resonate. So before we go into the actual fundraiser, both of you, if you want.
Yep.
Kind of take me through your story, your backstory, how you guys met, what the dynamic here is, and then we will start tackling, the core of the show, which is this very important fundraiser.
Yeah.
Okay.
Honey, do you want to?
Oh, I got to start? Okay.
Yeah.
So we met online. We're one of those couples. We're both introverted, and our writing is more eloquent than our actual in-person.
I can relate to that. Absolutely.
Yep. So we met online through Christian Mingle, and we when we emailed each other, I think the first time I messaged her was something about, in her profile, she talked about she liked video games and manga and comics and all that stuff. So I remember I emailed her and I asked something about Captain America. I think that's what it was. And the most ironic thing was she responded to me on July 4th.
And I was watching the movie when I responded, actually. So.
Yep. And so we started emailing each other back and forth, and progressively our emails got longer and longer and longer, so much to the point where we were silently grading each other's grammar.
Not so silently.
Yeah,
I'm a teacher, so it wasn't
silent.
so silent. It was straight up. You spelled that wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at. I think it would take us something like 2 hours, because I think one of the emails that I wrote was maybe at least 3 pages, like three and a half pages. So, and I think they were all like single spaced or something.
Yeah. So then our first date, I'm a history teacher, so he was trying to impress me. So he suggested the Henry Ford Museum.
Oh, wow.
And he spent the entire time trying to impress me with his knowledge of history. And I, smiled and nodded and very, yes, oh, really? Tell me more. Tell me more. Really? I never heard that.
So usually when I go to the Henry Ford with friends and people and whatnot, they're really not very historically astute.
Sure.
I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
I already knew it.
So the hilarity was, my favorite part of the Henry Ford actually is the woodworking area. So I used to be a woodworker. I used to build a lot of stuff. And I was taking her through this, and I'm kind of pointing out some stuff about, here's how this was made, and here's kind of the history behind this and whatnot.
Because nothing woos the ladies like talking about different styles of furniture. Not just,
well,
pitter patter.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, I was talking about wood. So,
trying to impress me with your knowledge of wood.
Yes. So
wood's important. I mean, it really is.
It kind of is, yeah, right? And we go around all these various different places, in the Henry Ford, and kind of hilarity ensued, and we just started dating, and next thing comes along. It was her birthday on March 16th. So my wife's birthday is in between the Ides of March and St. Patrick's Day.
316, I love it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Which,
Yep.
There you go.
That's 316.
Yep. And I went down to her school, and earlier, I think that weekend, or maybe the weekend before, I came down to her house. My wife's from Bowling Green, and we was hanging out with her dad and mom, and I basically asked them for permission to marry her. And I had
Now, in all fairness, how much of that conversation was asking him to marry me, and how much of that was talking about 80s television? Roundabout.
Okay, fair point.
They spent about an hour and a half talking 80s television, and then like 10 minutes like, oh, can I marry your daughter?
Yeah, so
Fantastic.
Well, my father-in-law and I bonded over 80s television. So like the first day I met him, he basically took me upstairs and we started talking about, hey, do you remember that 80s show I forget exactly how we got on the subject of it, but we were talking about 80s television and we kind of bonded over that. And my mother-in-law loves studying the Civil War. And I used to teach Civil War history. So when I was in college, I was a part of a supplemental instruction for American history. And my specialization was the Civil War. Well, specifically naval Civil War. Mm-hmm. So we sort of bonded over these mutual interests. And my father-in-law loves to collect sports cards and whatever. But to us, after having that quick conversation, I went to Jessica's school on her birthday. And I had the ring in my pocket. And I proposed to her in her classroom.
After school, because we had an earlier conversation where I told him that he would die if he ever tried that in front of my students.
So you guys had talked about the
we knew it was coming. I just didn't know timing.
Yeah. So we had talked. Probably it was maybe a couple weeks before then.
At least.
Yeah. And
around Valentine's Day when he gave me an urn. It's a true story. He bought what looked like a birthstone that's shaped like a heart necklace for my birthday, or for Valentine's Day, and he thought it was really sweet. And then when it showed up, it had a little like shovel and a little like funnel, and it turned out it was to hold the ashes of a loved one. And so that was supposed to be my Valentine's Day present.
And I didn't know this when I bought it.
No, he did not.
That's what makes this even more hilarious. So I bought it, and it said, show your love to the person who has your heart, right?
Be with you always.
Yeah, be with you always, or something to that effect. And she opens it, and it's this really
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really nice looking. And then when she opened it, I didn't notice the shovel, so I thought that it was just a clasp.
No.
Like, you pull the clasp off and then, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
dump your loved one's ashes.
Yeah, just pick your loved one up, carry him with you.
Yeah.
That was one of those.
Very special. Very special.
That was one of those when you flub a promo and you're trying to recover your steam and it just doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you're kind of like, just bail. Get it over with and bail,
Yeah.
But I proposed to her on her birthday, in her classroom.
And I said yes, of course.
Yep. And we set our wedding date on July 4th, which was 1 year after we met. Mm-hmm. It's never escaped me the irony that we've lost our independence on Independence Day.
Yes.
And
so true.
That's fantastic.
We've had a lot of good adventures back and forth, and a year after we were married, we wanted to start raising a family. And most couples, it's usually pretty
quick,
cut and dry, and they wind up conceiving pretty usually they say it's within 6 months of trying. And it was like, no matter what happened, I think it was like a year, and we finally went to doctors, and it was such it
was a long process.
Yeah, it was a long ordeal.
We tried a few different medications. So there's Clomid, which would help on my end if it was me. And when we went in for the first round of Clomid, that was actually really when our bad luck started. They said, hey, one of your ovaries, perfect, ready to go. You could have twins even. Oh, by the way, there's some bad news. You have a tumor on the other ovary. So it had grown so large and was wrapped so far into the ovary that they had to remove it along with the tumor because they just couldn't get it out otherwise. And that we really hit a bad luck streak starting there. And then kind of
and after having that, I was told by the place where I used to work that, oh yeah, by the way, we're having budget issues, and we're going to eliminate your job. So
then we had to rush to get my surgery done, so we still had insurance on him. Well, yeah.
And my job was really nice about giving me 2 extra weeks.
Yeah.
Because how it works in the fiscal year is that I would have been let go at the end of September. But because they were really nice about the service that I had, and that kind of thing. They kept me on for another 2 weeks,
Which gave him just enough time to get his car rear-ended and totaled because someone was texting on their phone and they rear-ended him and totaled the car.
Of course.
Yeah, so it was after Jessica had her surgery. I was on my way to my old job to kind of, get some stuff taken care of, and stopped, not even kidding, a block, like not even a block on Ellsworth Road, right where I needed to go. And some girl in a Cadillac Escalade or whatever the Cadillac version of that is, wasn't watching where she was going and plowed right in the back of me. And
so that totaled the car, which was great because then we were able to use the money to pay off the loan from the car, but now we were down to one car.
Yeah, and it was, initially they said they were just going to fix it. Wasn't a big deal. It didn't really have a lot of damage. And then Progressive calls me and says, yeah, oh, by the way, the undercarriage of your car is completely destroyed. So we're going to total your car and we're going to send you the money for it. And by the way, we're also going to pay you enough to pay everything off. So that was at least fortunate. It floated us a little bit, so that we could pay that off and kind of, go through our, survive for a little bit.
And then we found out a few weeks later when my car went in for routine maintenance, they said, yeah, this thing is a health hazard. You are, lucky to be alive at this point. The whole undercarriage is about to fall out. So, and we got it checked again by someone else, and they said, yeah. So then my car was also not safe.
I had borrowed her the car. I think we were getting ready for Will's wedding.
Yeah,
I think that's
it was Will's wedding. Yeah.
So Will's wedding, I went to go. Actually, funny. I think I picked up Rick Cartier, and we hit railroad tracks, and the bottom just sort of like something hit, and then all of a sudden we had major damage to the car.
And it was because it had already been rusted out on the bottom. We just didn't know it, so all it took was one railroad track bounce.
Giant, hit, and then so it started this spiral of things like
bad luck
over and over and over again, and I then probably later on, I think in December, I was having issues with. I think I had my first bout.
Yes, Christmas.
Yeah. Well, that was my original first bout of diverticulitis.
Oh, yeah.
And we fast forward into, January.
Well, no, we need to stop at Christmas because Christmas Day.
Well, this was actually the later.
Oh,
okay. So in January, February, I'm a therapist by trade. So I'm a mental health professional. And COVID hits. So people going into the office to get therapy, nobody does that anymore. So the mental health field kind of took a giant hit.
Across the board?
Yeah, pretty much across the board. It wasn't until way later, well, they didn't really have laws and rules and regulations for online therapy like they do now. So this took everybody by surprise.
Yeah.
I think maybe I got it was maybe in April. I had the unemployment started to run out and they wouldn't extend me. So we wound up having to start paying for our own health insurance, which at the end of December, the health insurance that I had paid for, my old job says, yeah, we'll continue your health insurance if you want to give us $1,500 a month. So obviously that's not going to happen.
But then Jeff was able to get a job, a part-time floating job at Home Depot, and then that floated him to, he found another part-time counseling job, which was awesome.
Yep. And we had our own health insurance, and I think because of, the lack of income that I had, it was fairly cheap, on the marketplace. But
yeah, regardless.
Yeah.
Fast forwarding.
And this job, that I'd worked for in a private practice really wasn't paying all that much. And I mean, I was trying.
Well, and part of it is Jeff's license. So to do the, you know better about the license, but he has like a not quite full time. It's like when you're teaching, you have a provisional license and then you have to work for so long to get a professional license. It's the same thing for mental health workers. So he doesn't have his full professional license yet. And so he was limited in the clients he could take. He was limited in, you know, what he could do.
Yeah. So I have a limited licensure in, I'm a limited licensed professional counselor. So it takes about 3 years to get a full license, or 2 if you really, you know, kind of got a lot of hours, which I didn't have.
Yeah.
So eventually what we had to do because of financial issues, we had to take some money out of our 401k in order to kind of float us to survive. And in December, we went through all kinds of financial trouble in November-ish.
Well, and around November was when we finally decided. We had been trying for almost 3 years at that point to have kids, and so we knew something was up. Jeff had gotten tested before and had some results that said he had...
I think it was the low motility and low volume.
Yes.
So
his swimmers.
Yes.
Yes.
My swimmers did not swim well.
No, and they were in the kiddie pool and they needed arm floaties.
And I couldn't draw a crowd. So,
yes.
You know,
So yeah, so we knew that there was an issue there, so we went to, actually Tyler was the one.
Yeah, I couldn't draw, so I had to go back to hone my craft again, I guess.
Yes, so a friend recommended IVF Michigan to us. We went there.
Yep.
Our dog is playing in the background, so if you hear squeaking, she has decided that now is the perfect time to play on the floor where we can't reach her.
Yes.
I can't really hear her, so we're
okay. Good.
Awesome.
So we went to IVF Michigan, and they tested. On my part, everything was as it should be, except I was obviously one girl down, so to speak, and then tested him.
Yeah, and basically that's when we found out the issue with me. So as it turns out, in addition to having the low motility and the low volume, there's some kind of genetic defect.
Abnormal sperm morphology.
Yeah. Essentially, yeah, that's the official term of it.
Means he's got mutants down there. Which I said isn't a bad thing. I mean, who doesn't want to birth an X-Man? I mean, who doesn't want a mutant, superhero as a child? But no, the doctors are all like, no.
Like yes. Thing or something. We've got issues, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's more common than you think for somebody, in their 40s. So I'm 43. I just turned 43, but they had given me all kinds of extra blood work and tests, and they said, blood work you're fine, but because of this morphology, we don't have many options. So I mean, Tyler had referred us to this doctor, and he basically gave us 2 options. So he said, you can do what's called IUI, which is intrauterine insemination. And basically all it is, they just take the swimmers and
give them a bath,
clean them up, put tuxedos on them, and they
send them up.
They parachute them into Normandy.
Yes. But because of his age especially, they said that the success of that is very, very low. So they didn't recommend that at all. So
they said that the success would be anywhere between like
3 to...
Yeah, it was. They ranged anywhere from like 5 to 15%.
Yeah, so not good.
Yeah, and then we looked into IVF, so in vitro fertilization. So we looked into the whole process behind it. We looked into, the costs involved,
which was a lot. So we found out on average it's about $25,000 to do IVF.
Yep.
And that's just one round. So that's assuming it works the first time, which again, with the issues we have, there's no guarantee.
Yeah. So what they had also said was that, I don't know how familiar you or your listeners are with IVF, but basically what they do is they sort of pick out the strongest soldiers and they'll make something like, depending on how many kids that you want to have, they make anywhere from like 1 to 8 embryos.
Even more. Like they can do up to. So they would essentially give me medication that would help to produce extra eggs, and then harvest those, and then he would do his thing, so to speak, in the cup, and they would take his strong soldiers and then pair them up and make some embryos out of them. Usually it could be anywhere up to 20. You know, especially with our ages. I'm 39, he's 43, so with our ages, they'd probably want to make more, just on the safe side.
Yeah, and so after they've, you know, gotten the people together for D-Day, there goes the historical references. Well, you know, the Colonel has to get in there somehow.
Which, if he didn't tell you, I helped write the Colonel's last few promos. So
that is a lie.
That is not a lie.
That is a lie.
I gave you some of those metaphors. You're welcome.
That is a lie. No, that is no.
So yeah, you know, and part of it, I felt weird about it, because my thought was, if they harvest 20 of these, if we think of these as our potential children, let's say we get pregnant the first time, then we still got 18 or 19 left, and let's say we want to have a sibling, you know, and even if it takes some, we still have 10 left, and then just in my heart, in my mind, I'm a very emotional person, my thought is, those are 10 of our kids that, you know, we're never going to have, and what do we do with those? And so I was just struggling with that aspect of it, aside from the fact that it was, you know, $25,000 for the first try.
And they said that, so how those kind of things work, you pay for the upfront costs, like the paperwork, the health screenings, the testing, the blood work. Then you have the process of actually making the embryos, and then you have to pay for storage. So storage, they said, it could go anywhere between like $300 to $1,500 a year to store them.
Extra embryos, yeah.
And we were looking at this strictly from a, you know, not only an ethical standpoint, a financial standpoint, but also from a couple standpoint of, you know, for us, ever since I was in my early 20s, I've always wanted to be a dad. And I've had, when my niece and my nephew was born about 7 years ago, I held them in my arms when they were first born. And I've always loved kids. I've loved having, you know, kids next to me and around me, and, you know, loved playing with my niece and my nephews.
And then there's me, and I'm a teacher, and I'm around kids all day, and I'm like, no, please. It took me a while. When we first got married, I wasn't so sure on the kid front, because I'm like, I'm around them all day, and they aren't the fun all the time. But eventually, you know, being with Jeff, I realized that I do want to, you know, have kids with him. He'll be a great dad, and I want to see what he's going to be like. And you know, I just have a very nurturing nature, and so he won me over with the idea. And
well, in fairness, the kids that you're talking about haven't found soap yet. Yeah. So teenagers.
That was going to be my question. What age are we talking about? You said you're a school teacher. What?
Yes. I teach middle school and high school. So yes, and I actually prefer the middle schoolers because they're a little more fun. But yes, as Jeff said, they're starting to reach that beautiful age where their bodies are maturing a little faster than their minds. And we talked every year about leaving deodorant and little, you know, soap sacks in their lockers.
Yep.
Love them, but yes, their bodies are wonderful and changing in all sorts of awesome ways that they don't understand.
Their bodies are changing and they feel unsure.
And they smell unsure.
Yes.
They need to use sure.
Yes.
So,
and we started going through this whole emotional roller coaster. And when the doctor looks at me and says, and I'm sure that as a man, and I'm sure that the men out there who listen can kind of, you know, understand this, is that when a doctor looks at you and says, you're the reason why you can't be a dad, you're the reason why that the odds of you being a father are less than 15%, that the amount of heartache and the amount of devastation that you have, and even more so to the point of, this isn't even going into having, wanting to be a dad. This is someone telling you that physically there's something wrong with you.
And I'm sure women can understand that too, because if it was, if it was my fault, I'm sure I would have if it was on my part, I would have felt horrible too. Yeah. So it's just that, and so we went through a lot dealing with, him dealing with the guilt, me trying to comfort him, and, what can you say? I can say it's not your fault, but, inside he's like, it is my fault. So, it really actually did help grow us as a couple, just because, being there for each other through it and trying to work through this as we're working through, everything else we're dealing with, car, and our house was breaking down at this point too. Our roof leaked, our dryer broke, our lawnmower broke, our doorknob fell off our front door. So it was, we just, when I say we had a streak of bad luck, it's hard to describe. Oh, and our freezer broke too. Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to describe.
So when it rains, it pours, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was.
Yeah. And so we were dealing with all that. And then we, came to this, doctor's appointment and found this out, and the doctor looked at us and pretty much said, you have very little chance, if any, of naturally conceiving.
And, as a dad, I'm sure, Jason, you can understand this, is that there are certain things that, as a husband, you're kind of obligated to do, like taking care of your family, taking care of your children, your wife, taking care of your household,
your guinea pigs,
or whatever animals you do have. And then being told that not only are you not able to have kids, compound that to the fact that you can't even financially provide for your family. And you're not able to, the job that you're doing isn't really providing. And as a therapist, looking in all different types of, jobs and professions, and, trying to do, to get other different therapy jobs, they don't really want to hire, like Jessica was mentioning earlier, they don't really want to hire a limited license guy because they can't really bill in that way.
Well, it's one of those catch-22s where they won't hire you until you get more experience, but how can you get experience if no one's going to hire you?
Yeah.
Right.
So he was, and especially with COVID, the number of in-person therapists went down, so they were being very choosy and picky about who they were taking. So he was struggling with all of this, and then me trying to be there, with him, and it was a very rough few months. And then Christmas was finally when we had ultimate fun. So Christmas Eve, his family came over, and good to see them. And he wasn't looking so good in the days leading up to it. He had just found a full-time job, and actually that kind of leads into our talk of how we decided on embryo adoption. Yep. So Jeff had heard about it.
I was on my way home from, this was maybe a year before we actually talked about it, as seriously considered the option. I was on my way home from working late, and I heard this on Focus on the Family talking about Project Snowflake, or embryo adoption, which, we can talk about that.
The term snowflake, by the way, this was created like 20, 30 years ago. So now when we say snowflake, it means something completely different.
Right,
so.
right.
Yeah.
So he hears about it on the radio, tells me about it. I was very unsure at first because I'm like, if we can't have kids of our own, why am I going to try and put my body through embryo adoption? So embryo adoption, for those who don't know, so for couples for someone like me who had that emotional attachment to embryos, the thought of those 10 extra embryos or kids I could have had, my choices are to donate them to science, in which case they might do some good, but they're going to be destroyed, to just destroy them. Some couples have like a ceremony or like a little burial for them or something. Or to keep them in storage indefinitely where they're just going to sit because I know I already have my 2 or 3 kids. I feel like my family's complete. So embryo adoption is for those families. they are able to take those embryos that they have left over and they donate them either to a fertility clinic or for us, we're going through the National Embryo Donation Center or through Nightlife Adoptions, which is the Project Snowflake. So they donate those embryos and then other couples essentially adopt them. So, you know, we would adopt embryos. They would essentially become ours. We would have them implanted. The children would be ours legally, carry our name. The only difference is they're genetically not ours.
Right.
And so, but my thought was, just hearing about it at first, I was like, why do I want to put my body through 9 months of pregnancy for a child that isn't, you know, ours? And so I was very unsure. I thought about it, prayed about it for a few weeks. And then finally one day I just sat up and I'm like, I love this idea. I love the idea of being able to, even if it's not genetically our child, of being able to carry this baby. And, you know, it would, you know, be in my womb. It would hear our voices. It would know us when it's born. So I just decided that it was great. I told him about it. We were on what we call a poke date. So when I met him, he was Pokemon hunting at the Henry Ford. Because we're nerds like that. I didn't start. I was a holdout.
Yeah.
I'm too cool.
So we were playing a game on our phone called Pokemon Go. So
Yep.
I'm sure your kids probably heard of it.
Look, there are guys that I work with to this day, I feel like, that they're walking around the plant with their faces in their phone. Oh, there's something here. And I'm looking, I'm like, what?
What's there? What's there? And that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
So I was a latecomer, so I didn't start until about a year and a half ago. But so we were on a poke date where we went Pokemon hunting after his work. And I just told him, hon, I feel really good about this. So let's go forward. Let's do embryo adoption. Literally an hour later, he looks at his phone and he says, I just got an email. So he had had a phone interview, 3 months before with someone for a job, an intake specialist at a inpatient facility. And that he hadn't gotten the job, but his interview was really good and positive.
Yeah.
So then suddenly out of the blue, this guy emails him and says, hey, Jeff, I was thinking about you, and we have a new job opening up, and I know you didn't apply for it, but I think you'd be great. Why don't you apply? And I can almost guarantee you're going to get the full-time position. So I literally told him that I wanted to do embryo, that I was on board for this, and literally an hour later, he got that email, and it said, full-time job.
And you know, I met the person who referred me to this job was, I was working at this part-time practice, and she had mentioned that, you know, I just came to her and I was honest. I said, you know, I'm not getting a lot of clients. There's not really a lot of, it's not really financially worth it for me. And she had told me about this job that had opened up and wanted me to apply and said, hey, you know, you could put my name down. And the person responded. And after I got the interview, they said, you know, we'll be in touch and we'll contact you.
3 months later.
Yeah. And it was like 3 months financially. It was like, it seemed like an eternity. But
it was just the fact that it was out of the blue and like we hadn't heard from him. And he's like, I was thinking about you. And it was such a wonderful coincidence to us that the moment that we said, yes, let's go forward with embryo adoption. And, you know, we were so happy about it. Literally an hour later, we got the email that said, we have a job for you.
Yeah.
So, and it's a full-time job. It has benefits. It has, you know, and at that point we had eaten through our savings. Like we were literally scraping bottom of the barrel. So it was such, you know, we call it a God moment. It was like, there's no other, the timing was just.
And to kind of give you an idea of financially how much trouble this was, on average, I think I was probably pulling in maybe about $400 to $500 a month. And this was from clients and, you know, trying to...
At this point, I had taken the year off of school, too, because I had my ovary, my surgery and everything, and we were still thinking that it would be okay to start a family. So we said, well, why don't I just take a year off, recover from surgery, everything else, and then COVID hit, and we were like, well, teaching became a lot weirder, and so I wasn't pulling in anything, and it was just pretty much solely him, and then I got an online job doing transcription work, but still.
Yeah.
So it was beautiful timing. It was wonderful. He started end of December. Perfect. Like I said, his family came over Christmas Eve. It was wonderful to see them. They had a baby, you know, because of COVID, we hadn't seen them. So they had a baby. So we got to meet him for the first time. He was like 3 months old. It was wonderful. He just was looking off. He wasn't feeling well. I went off to run some errands Christmas Eve, came home, and he had like a burning fever, but he was cold. fever, chills, fever, chills. I got him up to bed. He started to like mumble and talk, wasn't making coherent sense. And in the morning, finally, I said, in a wife voice, I said, do you want to go to the hospital? In the wife voice, that means you are going to the hospital.
Yeah. And how that kind of all played into was I'd started the job December 21st. So I started that Monday on December 21st. I was there for maybe 4 days, 3 or 4 days. And Christmas Eve, we have all the family come in. Mm-hmm. Little kids are around, and I'm starting to feel really weird. So I had a condition called diverticulitis. So, for your listeners, diverticulitis is when you have these pockets, like these large pockets in your colon, and food and whatever will get trapped in there, and then it can get infected. So it's what Brock Lesnar had.
I was just going to say that. Yes.
Yeah. And that's kind of what kicked him out of action for a while.
Right.
And I've had various bouts of diverticulitis over my lifetime, but this last 4 years, it was getting progressively worse. And, on Christmas Eve, our family comes over. I'm not really moving a lot. I just feel so tired and exhausted. I mean, my stomach hurt a little bit, but it's sort of like, hey, well, maybe I ate something wrong. Maybe it's gas. Maybe it's, acid reflux, because I have acid reflux. Yeah. Maybe it's something like that. So I didn't think really much of it until later on that night. I tell Jessica that I'm going to go to sleep, just kind of sit in my chair. And
passed out.
I woke up and I was shivering so bad.
I had him under 5 blankets, and it was one of those heaters on him, and he was just...
And I couldn't get warm. It was like nothing that was happening could keep me warm. And then, she had a heating pad on me. We had 4 or 5 blankets on me. And later on that morning, and I actually tell her this story, is that I was hallucinating. So I'd actually saw my dead parents.
And that's his fever was so high at that point.
Yeah.
That it was spiking, it was ridiculously spiking.
And Jessica finally said, as she mentioned,
do you want to go to the hospital?
Yeah, she's like, yeah, you're going. So I went to the ER, and because of COVID, they wouldn't allow her to come in with me.
But right. He wasn't fully lucid at that point, so I had to text him the symptoms that he was having so he could show them the phone. Yep. To explain what we had seen over the past 24 hours, because he couldn't really, tell them everything.
Yeah.
So I was sitting in a car on Christmas Day, which, by the way, the only thing open was a Speedway. So I was there for over 12 hours. Thank God for Speedway and having a bathroom, because I wasn't even allowed in the hospital to go. So it was, either find a quiet place in the parking lot with trees or Speedway.
And basically what we found out was, had I would have waited 3 days, I would have been dead.
Yeah.
Because they had a giant abscess. So they injected me with all kinds of antibiotics.
Yeah.
I was in the hospital. He had
infection all throughout his body. They said literally it wasn't even 3 days. They said a day and a half, 2 days, and he would have been gone. He would have been past the point they could have helped. So
fast forward, a week later after I get out of the hospital, I go back to work for another 3 weeks and have another bout.
And he followed, they gave him a diet and everything to follow, and we were pretty strict about following it, and it just happened again. So he was out of work. So he was out of work for 1 week first, and then he was out of work for another week. And that one, we went to the hospital at 3 a.m., and I found out there's deer. If you're ever at St. Joe's Hospital in Ann Arbor, they have a lot of deer around there who will come up to your car. So so everyone knows if they're interested in deer or hunting, I guess.
And, there's basically throughout all this span of 4 months, I kept going in and out of the hospital. And in the beginning of April, I went back again. And I got a fever really bad. I went to the ER on a Tuesday. They sent me home. They said, stay home for observation. We'll give you some more antibiotics. And they said, if you have a fever, go back to the ER. So that Sunday I had a fever. Jessica took me back to the ER. Flash forward 2 weeks later, I'm getting surgery.
It wasn't 2 weeks, it was 1 week, yeah.
1 week later, yeah, and I'm getting surgery.
And it was emergency, so like they had a specialist come to see him Thursday, and our thought was, based on what they had said, they were gonna, finish the antibiotics and let him leave Friday. And oh no, on Thursday I got a text saying, oh hey honey, by the way, I'm having surgery tomorrow. So the surgeon actually decided, based on what she had seen, that there was just too much of a risk.
Yeah.
Normally she would have tried to wait until the inflammation was down, but she said she couldn't wait because she was so worried.
And what the doctor had told me was that it's just going to keep coming back. There's nothing we can do to fix it. So they decided that, I got it cut out of me.
And the surgery went really well. The doctor said it was actually a really good thing. She was still unsure up to the minute they cut. Like, she was still unsure if she wanted to. She said she was glad she did because he was so blocked up that nothing could have gotten through, that it would have, like, given another few weeks, it would have just gotten worse and worse and, maybe caused permanent damage. So it was good timing.
And to the point, I was then out of work for another 2 months.
Yeah.
So
because for this before surgery,
I had
surgery
to have
healing,
and I had to be healed. So we didn't have any money coming in for this whole span of time.
And he wanted to go to work, but surprisingly enough, having a section of your intestines cut out and sewn back together doesn't really give you a good bounce back.
Yeah, the doctor was like, not having part of your colon, having your colon, basically torn apart and put back together.
And nothing bonds you as a couple more than every day asking your husband if he's pooped. Like, that just is really bonding, that every day you're like, have you pooped? How was it? Was it okay? It's just such a good couple bonding moment.
Yeah, I swore off Gatorade because they told me I had to drink Gatorade and...
Oh, for the prep before surgery to clear out the tubes.
Let's not gross him out with that.
Oh, we won't get too much, but yeah. So, and we were very glad, too. We were worried one of the things, if the surgery didn't go well, he would have to get a colostomy bag, colostomy bag, which, you have to empty the intestines into and then empty. And I told him I am not paid enough to take his crap. So he better not get one.
And,
and he didn't, which was great.
And then kind of what started to follow in was... while we're doing this, we're starting to do the paperwork for our baby Snowflake, and we're doing all of the pre-work we had to do. So we had to do a lot of listening to watching videos and doing summaries, and we had to go through this educational process of how it worked. So
some places, like if you go to an IVF clinic, they'll just, sign you up for embryo adoption. But we specifically went through an organization that treats it like a true adoption. They want to be sure that you know what you're getting into, because a lot of families who adopt kids aren't quite ready for what that entails. And my family, I grew up with adoption. Half of my cousins are adopted. So for me, it was a normal concept growing up, but even they struggled, especially as the kids got older with, the kids with their, birth parents, with, everything. So, adoption does carry a heavy toll. And how we've treated adoptions in America in the past 30, 40 years has changed. It used to be, don't tell the kids unless they find out. But now it's all about let them know their origins and everything. Let them own who they are.
Yeah.
And so we really wanted an organization that would help us understand that. So the NEDC, the National Embryo Donation Center, makes you do an education section where you learn about, okay, this is professional therapists. How do we talk to, how do we deal with the origins of our child? How do we introduce it to them? How do we deal with grieving as parents, that we are never going to have a genetic child. So, working you through that.
And as a therapist, I'm trained in a lot of these things, but when you're actually confronted with them and so they say that, doctors make the worst patients,
right.
Therapists make the worst clients. So I'm looking at all this information. And I'm like, yeah, I know all this. But when we got to this idea of grieving your own genetic child, it brought back that memory of being in the doctor's office and that doctor telling me essentially is like, you're the reason why you can't have kids. And I remember when the doctor actually told me that, I left out of the parking lot and I buried my head in my hands and I sobbed. Like I was uncontrollably sobbing
So it was a good education thing to go through, but we had to do this as he's recovering. So, you know, having the time we have to do doctor's appointments, we have to do blood work, we have to do all this paperwork, we have to do a home study. So it is like a true adoption. They do a home study. We have that set up for early next month. The person is going to come and do an actual home study, like for a foster family or adopted family.
And there have been, you know, a lot of questions as to the process itself, and I'm sure probably maybe your listeners would have questions on. We got this question quite a bit. Why don't you do traditional adoption? There are lots of kids in the foster system. There's lots of kids that, you know, they really could use parents, and they could really use kind of home, you know, they could use a home. And as we talked about before, the costs involved with all of that, we were floored to find out how much of the costs for all of these various different options. Yeah. So IUI costs somewhere around $8,000, $6,000 to $8,000. IVF is like $25,000, give or take. Traditional adoption can cost anywhere between $45,000 all the way on up to like $150,000. So this depends on
organizations you go through, lawyers, etc. But
and most
on
people,
average, it's $50,000 if you do an adoption in the U.S.
And most people will say, all right, well, what about doing the overseas adoption? Isn't that cheaper?
No, it's way more expensive.
No, it actually costs more.
And then for foster care, we had actually discussed that at great length. Me being a teacher, him being a therapist, we've seen all of the sad stories in foster care about, you know, families who are hoping to adopt and then kids get placed with them and either they return to their foster families who are abusive to them, but that's the system, or, you know, just for some, you know, even if it's a happy ending and they get to go back to their families, you know, you still have that loss. Jeff gets attached very easily. We just tried fostering a dog a week or two ago. He had already like fallen in love with it after day 2. And when it actually got adopted, like he was a big boy, he was a good boy, and he gave it up, but it was so hard for him to say goodbye. Well, and the thought is, you know, us having to see those foster kids and having to say goodbye, like both of us just, I think we're just scared to have that.
And take the whole financial, you know, aspect aside. They're also, in terms of live adoption, which is what they call traditional or live adoption. They said to us that sometimes you can get, if you find a couple who's willing to have a private adoption, you could go hire an attorney, and for like $5,000 you could do that. But there's always that caveat whenever you do traditional adoption or even fostering, that the parents could want to come back and get that.
Parents have up to so many months to change their mind.
And there's been tons of cases. You know, there's one in particular that actually was from Michigan. I'm blanking. I think it was baby Jessica, but the child was adopted by a family, and they had raised this child up until the age of like 7. And they found some technical loophole where the parents, one of the parents didn't sign off or signed off under duress, and they went and got this child back. So,
although that's probably been closed up loophole wise, but still, they usually have 3 months to a year to. So anyway, we're just, you know, that was considerations. It wasn't, we didn't make this decision just financially. We didn't make it lightly. There was a lot of talking going on in those months leading up to the decision of what should we do.
Yeah.
And so that's really what, you know, made us love embryo adoption. So we've been doing, I mean, the process, we're very open to questions. If anyone has questions for us, we're very open to questions and answering. The organization we go through did a great job on education, just on educating, like we had a whole scientific like seminar on what happens to the body during embryo adoption and cells and how cells separated. It was high school biology, which I had hoped to never live through again.
Some of it was high college level.
Oh, it was.
So I can't imagine some of the couples who don't have that kind of science background to understand about how the you know, the whole process works.
Yeah, but I mean, so we're very open, just, you know, any sort of questions that people have. But we really just felt, compelled. And so we've been doing the paperwork, and there's a lot of paperwork. Let anyone know who goes down this road, do not be faint of heart in paperwork, because you will be up to your elbows in just paperwork, because you have to do paperwork for, the embryo adoption, for the home study, for, we're going to try and apply for some grants to help offset the cost too. Yeah. So you have to, fill out more paperwork for that. There's just, and then you have to, find a local doctor. You have to, wherever you're going to go for the implantation, the frozen embryo transfer. There's just nonstop paperwork and doctor's visits and blood work. And
yeah, and there's we talk about the emotional cost of parenthood, right? I mean, I don't need to tell you, Jason, there's a emotional cost to being a parent. And it's something you're never fully prepared to be a parent, but there's a lot of emotional soul searching that you do when you go through this process. And we looked through having to do all of this, basically homework. We were looking into, the emotional cost and weight of it. And one of the things that Jessica and I had talked about pretty extensively was the fact that there's over 1 million embryos that are frozen, currently awaiting to be adopted. And there were a lot of reasons, Ed, Jessica had alluded to, why we went down that road of embryo adoption. And one of the things that really struck me was that these couples who have donated, essentially human life in this donation center, over 1 million embryos are waiting to be adopted.
Well, not just in the center. But
not just in the center, but all over the world. Yeah. And we looked at it as a opportunity to help some of those children be born and give those children an opportunity at life.
Well, and just some of those families, like, again, with my emotional connection to those embryos being my potential children, there are women like that who those are their potential children, and they're just waiting, in flux. They don't know, are my children going to be born? Are they going to have a good family? Are they just going to, are they going to be frozen forever?
Right.
So we liked the idea of being able to, do that as well, of giving a family closure.
Yeah. And biologically, there are, a couple of good scientific things in that once an embryo is frozen, if it's frozen properly, as long as it's frozen and it remains frozen, there's virtually no limit on how long it can actually remain frozen. So recently there was an article where they had an embryo that was unfrozen and was actually older than the birth parents. So it was like a 30-year-old embryo, and the couple was 25 or something like that. So the couple literally gave birth to someone older than them, in theory.
Which is not at all mind-bending or strange in any way.
Yeah, metaphysically weird.
No, that's not awkward at all.
Are there any specific questions that you think the listeners might want to know?
Yeah, I was going to say that pretty much brings us up to now.
Yeah.
So
okay, so I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, right? Because
yeah, oh yeah,
yeah, oh yeah.
My goodness, you guys! I mean,
we can do a two-parter. We're okay with that.
Well, we're going to have to.
Oh no, sorry.
I definitely want to get the follow-up to what happens after.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. A couple of things stand out to me here.
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, you've gone very deep into the weeds here as far as your personal stories, your struggles, your thoughts, your concerns. I mean, it's almost, I don't want to say mind-blowing, but when I conduct an interview like this, very rarely do my guests or the people that I'm talking to go that deep into what all is happening.
Did we go too deep?
No, certainly not.
I was going to say.
Certainly not, because I think it's very important, because you have painted a brilliant picture here. Like, there is no questions. Number one, you know, everything that you guys have gone through. I mean, the struggles, the trials, the tribulations, everything. But the one thing that stands out with me, with you guys, is you're smiling. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You guys are, you know, you're engaged, you're making, you know, not light of it, but you're kind of joking around, you're keeping things light. Because I know people, if they were met with this, they would completely shut down, and it would just be the end of the world. You guys aren't doing that here. You're okay. You have been faced with this barrage of bad luck, one thing after another. You know, the loss of employment, the stuff is breaking down in the house, your car is falling apart as you go over, you know, a set of damn railroad tracks.
Good job.
And then, you know, Jeff, with you, you know, all of your health issues, and I mean, you're coming up to the brink of knocking on death's door. I mean, what in the world?
Yeah, I know, right?
But to me, I'm amazed that you guys have this. I mean, I'm looking at you through this camera here.
Yeah.
You guys have such a peaceful aura. You know what I'm saying? And you can really tell the love that you guys have for one another. It's inspiring.
Well, thank you, Jason.
And you know, Jeff, I've known you for, you know, quite a while.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I've never been exposed to this personal side of you. Like, I mean, I've gotten glimpses of it, but nothing like what you just laid out here.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's going to bring us up to this fundraiser, but absolutely, the one thing that I want to say before we start, you know, talking about this part of it is, number one, yes, we definitely have to have you guys back on for the follow-up. That's number one.
Sure.
Number two, I'm going to put a link not only to this fundraiser, but I'm going to set up a personal email for you guys that my listeners, and it will be directly to you.
Okay.
That will allow our listeners, if they have questions, if they have comments, if they have concerns, you know, anything like that, they can correspond with you.
Absolutely. And like we said, we're open. Any questions, we are totally open to answering.
Yeah, and we're not, you know, we're very open to whatever, you know, kind of question. And people have already asked us a lot of really good questions because embryo adoption is misunderstood in a lot of ways.
Well, and it's just so strange. Like, before I had never heard of it before he mentioned it. It was just, it's so, like, sci-fi, weird.
And one of the things that we've had people ask questions about is, you know, why this whole thing of taking other people's children when you can't have, you know, why don't you just go through IVF, and why don't you just go through?
Yep. And so any questions, anything, we're really fine in answering. And that's not to say, too, I know you said that we seem really peaceful and lighthearted about it. We've gone through the gamut. We definitely went through the dark times.
And Jason, as long as you've known me, I sometimes, you know, carry my heart on my sleeve. And one of the things that has really made it, you know, worthwhile for me is knowing that there's always a light at the end of the tunnel, you know, and knowing that days do get better, you know, to kind of steal from, you know, Scott Hall a little bit, you know, sometimes dreams do come true, you know, bad times don't last, but
even in the bad times, I mean, I think part of it, and I don't want to go into a sermon, but part of it is our faith. Just trusting God. That is a large part of the piece that you see in us, because we definitely went through those dark times, but our faith and just our commitment to each other brought us through. And I don't want to go into a sermon, but
there are.
I mean, that is very much on display here. I mean, that was, I mean, when you guys first started telling your story, you met on a Christian app or
Sure.
a singles app. So I
Right.
mean, right out of the gate, you are demonstrating that you are very much, a couple of faith.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I really, really do.
Sure.
And I'm not gonna. There are people that are gonna be like, it's religion. Screw all that. And just put that off to the side, because at the end of the day, it's coming through. It with your voices, it's coming through on screen here.
Yeah.
There is a legitimate passion between the two of you that is so admirable and so inspiring. And there's a lot of people that could take a lot of lessons based solely on the commitment that you two have for one another. And I think that's absolutely awesome. I really, really do.
Thank you.
Now, this fundraiser has been set up. Yep. And it's through adoptionbridge.org.
Yes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So kind of talk me through real quick are they affiliated with everything that, with the process of going through all this? Is this a separate entity that you were referred to? How did Adoption Bridge come into play here?
So while he was in the hospital, I had a lot of time to do research. And just looking, so the cost of embryo adoption, depending on where you go through, is usually between 10 to 20,000, which was cheaper than IVF and cheaper than traditional adoption. But still, with what we've been through, our savings is gone.
Sure.
So I just became a little research monkey and was looking up grants and loans and everything else I could look up. The thing about embryo adoption is it kind of falls in the cracks between traditional adoption. So there's a lot of grants and everything for traditional adoption, and then there's a lot of grants for IVF. But embryo adoption kind of falls in that weird space between. Yeah. So I really had to search out, ways that we could, find for embryo adoption to get some money.
And there's and kind of embryo adoption and how it works is that there are certain legal differences between having an actual, what we call a traditional adoption, and an embryo adoption.
Yeah.
So, and that's what kind of makes this, kind of a gray area with the grants, is that according to the law, they look at embryos as property.
So it's not traditional adoption law where you're dealing with a child, it's property law. And so because of that, the grants look at things differently.
Right.
And so just in one of the searches, I found, I was looking, random adoption grants, and I found Adoption Bridge. And so they are essentially like a GoFundMe, specifically for families either looking for help with adoption or embryo adoption of some kind. Yep. So you just set up like your own GoFundMe page, so to speak, and you set it up, and they just, walk you through how to do it, and, how to put your picture in, and, say, tell your story. Which is really hard because, as we said, we both write very long, like we were writing 3 to 5 page emails to each other. So my first go at it was about 4 pages, and we had to edit down. And
initially, so one of the things that we had to do when we were setting up our paperwork to go through embryo adoption is we had to write a letter to our prospective parents, the embryo the donor parents, And we kind of had to tell them, we tell them our story, and
and sorry, I'll cut in real quick.
Go ahead.
So just with embryo adoption, so it's not just like we take the embryo, see ya, bye. It's the organization we're going through essentially gives our profile, so the letter we write, and then our family profile to parents who have donated embryos. And those parents then are able to read, and they're able to say, yes, I would like this family to be able to adopt my embryos.
Right.
And then the organization then will pick like the top 3 or 5 couples that, said yes to us, and then we'll get to look through their stuff, and then we'll get to choose whose embryos we want. So it's both families are choosing, and then it's an open adoption where, we know a little about them. Maybe we don't know their home address, but we know their first names, we know, medical history, and they'll know the same about us.
Right.
And so we had to write a letter to those what are called the donor parents or the genetic parents. And so we ended up just taking a lot of that letter and using that as our adoption bridge profile, adding a little bit more, because our letter to them was more focused on the emotional and what we're like as a couple and family.
Right. And with us, when we were going through all the paperwork and we talked with the caseworker kind of gave us grant opportunities, and they had mentioned Adoption Bridge. So they had mentioned the GoFundMe aspect of it. Yeah.
And we had already started to sign up for it by that point. So
yeah, and Adoption Bridge is basically it is a GoFundMe, like Jessica mentioned, but I like to think of it more as it's a way for couples to make their dreams come true.
Oh my gosh, cheese!
Yeah, I know.
Cheese.
But I mean, honestly, it's as a person and as a couple who desperately want to be parents, Adoption Bridge allows us to get help from our family, our friends, from
random
people,
strangers.
Yeah, people out there. And
it's nice. The way it's set up is that Adoption Bridge, they figure that if you want a family, you need to be working for it and contributing your own money. So they only allow you to ask for up to 1/3 of what your total costs are going to be.
Sure.
Which embryo adoption, it actually, there's not necessarily set cost, because it depends on if the first round works, if you get pregnant on the first round, which they have about a 50% success rate. The center that we're going to, the NEDC, has one of the highest rates in the US of successful pregnancies, and it's still only about 53% the first time. So, rates are going to vary based on if we have to go in again. We have to travel down to Knoxville, where the center is, to actually do an initial doctor's appointment, which we're doing in September, and then the actual frozen embryo transfer, which I don't know when that'll be. So we have to, those costs are in there, the home study, the social workers, everything else. So we just estimated about 15,000. So on Adoption Bridge, we asked for about 1/3 of that, which is 5, and then Adoption Bridge takes 3%, I think, of all of that, just off the top. So just so you know how it works, or at least how we understand it to work.
Well, I mean, that part of it I don't know too much about, but the idea is when we were trying to find out more about Adoption Bridge and how it works, and we found out more about the overall costs, like Jessica had referred to, there was the flux can go anywhere between, like she was saying,
10 to 20. It's usually closer to 15 to 25.
It could be like 15 to 25 in essence, but on average, from the NEDC, they quoted us something like 15 to 17.5.
Yeah.
Which a lot of that is the upfront stuff.
The paperwork, the application fees, the processing, the initial doctor's appointments, all the blood work, woohoo, all the fun stuff.
Right. Okay, this panel, man.
Sorry, I know we're flooding you with information.
No. This is important, because this is a lot more detail than what was presented when Will was doing his fundraiser and stuff like that. And I feel like a lot of people may have bypassed it, or what, for the lack of a better term, because they didn't have this kind of information. And that's why I wanted you guys on the show, so that you could tell your story in detail, right? But my goodness gracious, it's
a lot.
It's a lot of information.
And I know a lot of people would have just thrown their hands up and said, this is too much, this is too hard, we're just going to go through life and not do this. But
bitter and grumpy.
Jeff, you are, like I know you get attached, and I know you wear your emotions on your sleeves, and I know what kind of guy you are. I will vouch for you until the cows come home. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you.
So here's what we're going to do. We are going to, when this show drops, both on YouTube and on the podcast, it will happen in the same week.
Sure.
I just need a little bit of time to edit it and all this good stuff.
Yep.
So I'm going to put the link to the Adoption Bridge fundraiser on there.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
So people can take a look.
Yep.
I am going to set up your own email so that people can correspond with you directly.
Awesome.
I don't want to be the middleman because God forbid, I don't want to screw anything up. Listen, I'm going to do everything I can to get this information out to as many people as I possibly can.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. Thank you.
And we're definitely going to have you back on here in a few weeks for a follow up.
Okay.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you so much.
You guys are fantastic. Jeff, I mean, I've always known that about you, but with you, Jessica, this was my first time actually speaking with you. So I mean, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Same.
It's so good to talk to you again.
No, it is, man. It's been a long time. It's and that's my fault because I'm going in 1,000.
We're all busy. Things happen.
Well, and COVID didn't help.
Yeah. You ain't kidding on there. That's a whole story for another day, right?
Yeah.
So, listen, in all sincerity, I'm going to do everything I can to help you guys.
Thank you.
Because I feel like this is very important. And, there are people who have kids, they have no right to, who have kids and to be parents, right? I mean, people like that. I do too.
Yeah.
You guys are not that,
Thank you.
And we're going to make something happen here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we are going to get your contact information out. We're going to set everything up, and then we'll have you guys back on for the follow up. Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jason. Right. We appreciate it.
For everybody that tuned in this week, we certainly appreciate that, and we hope that you will consider donating to this very special cause for a very special couple. So. Keep tuning in to our website, closedtotheheart.net. I will also put all of that information on our website as well as our Facebook and Twitter. And until then, we will see you the next time we come to you on YouTube. And every Tuesday at midnight, a new episode of the Closed to the Heart podcast will drop on Anchor.fm as well as Spotify. So with that, be awesome to yourselves and to each other. We will see you next time right here on the Closed to the Heart show on YouTube and the Closed to the Heart podcast on Spotify.